Hey, what's up, guys? Ninja Sword here, and I am here to tell you another story. Well, another chapter for the story Walker's World, A Boy Stand. This is chapter 3 from the Wattpad creator, Anthony Tyler 9. Without further ado, let's begin. Wait, we can't take risks like this, a feminine voice called out. And we can't just let people die either, the woman who helped save them all replied. When I say that door stays shut no matter what, I fucking mean it. We don't know who these people are. They could be dangerous, the second woman said, glaring at the group's small group savior. Worse, they could have led them right to us, an elderly man said, looking over to the first woman. Where the hell is your humanity? The woman who saved them questioned. We have kids with us, Lee said, as Izuku looked around the place. I see one little girl as well as a green-haired teenager, the elderly man states, as Izuku moved over to Concha and Duck. Is he gonna be okay? Izuku asks, as Concha nodded. I just need to clean him up. Then we can figure out how to get out of here, Concha replied, beginning to clean Duck up. Lee? What is it? Lee questions, a little tense. I need to pee, Clementine states, looking a little embarrassed. In a minute, Clem. We're in a very bad situation, Lee replied, his focus back on the conversation at hand. Izuku walked over near Lee and Clementine as he pulled the girl away from the conversation that was dreadfully coming close to a fight. He pulled her over to the counter to where they found a small key and led the young girl to the bathroom nearby. He had no idea what was going on, but he had wanted no part in it, since he was looking after Clementine at the moment, while Lee talked to the adults. They've got kids, Lily. Those things outside don't care, Lily replied, angrily glaring at the woman who said that. Maybe you should go join them then. You'll have something in common, Kenny replied, angrily glaring at her. God damn it, Lily, you have to control these people, the elderly man growled, as Lee speaks to Kenny. She's an asshole, that's for sure, he mutters. If that's what it takes, Lily states, now glaring at Lee. Well, you don't have to be a bitch about it, Lee retorts. Holy shit! Son of a bitch! One of them's bitten? The elderly man said as Lee angrily looked at him. He wasn't bitten, Lee angrily spoke. The hell he wasn't! We have to end this, now, the man says, before Kenny steps in his way. Over my dead body, Kenny replied, glaring at him. We'll dig one hole, the elderly man threatens. No, I'm cleaning the bite up. I'm cleaning up his body. There's no bite. He's fine, Gotcha calls out. Don't you fucking people get it? We've already seen this happen. We let someone with a bite stay and we all end up bitten, the elderly man calls out, somewhat insanely. Shut up, Kenny growls. We have to throw him out or smash his head in, the elderly man continues. Kenny, stop him, Concha calls out, becoming fearful. Lee, what do we do about this guy? Kenny asks, looking for guidance. We kick his ass, Lee retorts, as Kenny remembered Lee's loyalty. That's what I was thinking. Everybody just chill the fuck out, the woman from before called out. Nobody is doing anything, Lily replied, staring at the other woman. Shut up, Lily! And you, shut the fuck up. They're going to find us, and they're going to get in here, and none of this will fucking matter, because we're about to be trapped in here with one of those things, the elderly man growled out. The hell are you talking about? Kenny questioned him, a little confused. He's bitten! That's how you turn, the elderly man calls out. He's not bitten! Lee, stop this! It's upsetting him! Concha called out. Oh, I'm upsetting him! Upsetting him is getting eaten alive! The elderly man growled. Sit down, or else, Lee warns. You're gonna whoop me? You in what homo parade? The elderly man called out, glaring at Lee. This one right here, Kenny states, as the elderly man retorts. That's good. Little boy, before you eat your mommy, you're going to see your dad get his nose broken, the elderly man called out. On the other side of the room, Izuku and Clementine noticed that there was someone inside the bathroom already. Both were looking confused, but as Izuku rose his hand to knock on the door, it was smacked on by whatever was inside. I'm gonna kill him, Cat! Just worry about Duck, Kenny calls out to his wife. Lee, there's someone in there, Clementine said, before Lee looks over. She's right, Lee. Someone's in the bathroom, Izuku called out, gaining everyone's attention. It's just locked. Key's behind the counter, probably, Lee said as Izuku held the key in his hand. Hey, I'm not the bad guy here. I'm just looking out for my daughter, the man said, looking slightly calmer but still agitated. No, you're just a guy who's arguing over killing a kid, Kenny replied, though his voice was filled with anger. He's covered in muck. Watch, she'll find the bite. Watch, the elderly man growled out. She won't, Kenny promised. And when she does, first thing he'll do is sink his teeth into his mom's face. Then, when she's dead, he'll probably pounce on your little girl. She'll turn fast. Then there'll be 3. And that, boy, is the ball game, the elderly man growled. He's just a little boy. I think we can handle it, Lee states, as the elderly man looked at him in surprise. A little boy? He'll be an uncontrollable man-eater, the elderly man growled out, but in surprise. It's not gonna happen, Kenny growled angrily. It is, and we're tossing him out now, the elderly man yelled. Knock this guy out, Kenny, Lee said, as Kenny spoke. With pleasure. As Kenny punched the elderly man in the face, he took the punch to the face, without being moved from his spot before punching Kenny in retaliation. As Kenny was knocked out to the ground, Clementine and Izuku let out a scream of fear as they had unlocked the door during the conversation. Ah! Clementine screams. Clementine, get away! Izuku calls out, as the walker tackled him to the ground. Clementine! Izuku! Lee calls out, rushing to their aid. Get off! Get off! Get off! Izuku grunts out before he pulled out a knife from his pocket, while the walker grabbed his arms. The walker growled out. Jesus! The elderly man screamed. Lee rushed through the people that were in his way, before falling to the ground after tripping over one of the items on the ground. Getting back up immediately, he rushed over to find Izuku struggling to hold back the walker from the ground, as the walker's face kept getting closer and closer to him. Someone help me! Izuku screamed in fear as the walker forced the knife from his hand and across the floor to Lee. Get away from him, you son of a bitch! Lee calls out, grabbing the walker from Izuku's body. Pulling out the knife, he stabbed it into the head of the walker, causing it to go limp in his arms before he pushed it to the ground. Izuku, however, was with Clementine as he shuffled over to the wall of the room, his heart beating like crazy. Lee moved over to the two of them as he watched Clementine hug him, which he reciprocated as they both shivered in fear and the adrenaline coursing through their bodies. Man, Lee says, bending over silently. You okay? The female from earlier asked, as her gun was pointed at the walker, no shot having been taken. Just great, thanks, Lee states, as the sounds of walkers smacking the windows were heard. After the little quiet attack from the walkers, everyone let out a brief breath of relief as they heard the walkers hear sounds from outside, drawing their attention. Sitting down in the corner, Izuku had been holding his legs up to his chest as he felt as though he had come very close to losing his life. Clementine was sitting next to him as she had come back after using the bathroom in order to relieve herself. But their conversation from before wasn't over as the elderly man growled out at everyone who was in there. We almost died because nobody thought to check the bathroom? That was stupid! That was... The elderly man groans in pain before placing a hand over his chest. Dad! Lily calls out, kneeling next to him. Was he the one that was bitten? Lee asks, confused. No, don't be crazy. It's his heart, Lily said, as the elderly man spoke up. My pills, he painfully asked. Nitroglycerin pills? Concha asked worriedly. Yes, we're out. We've been trying to get into the pharmacy since we got here. Please, try to get in there. Behind the counter where the pills are, Lily begged. It's probably through the office, Lee said, a little saddened. I'll look after my dad, Lily states, sitting down next to him. Everybody should get comfy and gather anything useful. We could be here a while, Kenny states, as the other guy spoke up. I'm starting to feel like this drugstore might not be a permanent solution, the guy said as Kenny spoke. You're right. This isn't exactly Fort Knox. What do you suggest? What do you suggest? Lee asks. We need to find as much gas as possible so we can all get out of Macon, fast. Agreed. Then I'll head out and get gas. There's a motel not too far from here, out towards the end of Peachtree. I'll work my way towards it and come back siphoning what I can, the guy said as everyone nods. You know your way around town? Lee questions. Born and raised, the young man said. If you're gonna do that, here's a walkie-talkie in case you get in a tight spot. Hopefully, you won't need it, Lee states, as the young man nodded. Cool. Clementine's got the other one. Check in with her and see if you can get back here as soon as you can, Lee states as the young man nods. And you, what's your name? Kenny asks, looking at Lily. It's Lily. My dad's Larry, she said, as the woman who saved them spoke up. Name's Carly. Keep a good eye on him. These boys will get you his medicine, Kenny states as Lee spoke up. That's right. And you keep an eye on that front door. You're our lookout, Kenny states. It's Doug. You got it, the young chubby man said. And I'm Carly, the woman who saved them stated. All right, Carly, you'll shift in with Doug when he needs it. For now, get some rest. You're a good shot, and I'd like to keep it that way, Kenny states as everyone nodded at their jobs. You got it, boss, Carly states, though Lily glared at them for calling Kenny boss. Now get him those pills, Kenny stated sternly. As everyone went about their own little missions, Izuku stayed on the ground as he thought about what had happened earlier. He was completely helpless against that singular walker, and he had known that something or someone was inside the bathroom. He needed to be more aware of the places he went through, otherwise he'd just be a burden on others. Taking a deep breath, he walked over to Kenny, gaining the courage to ask him a question. Kenny, is there something I can do? Izuku asks, as the man looked down to him. Well, I guess you can keep both Clementine and Duck company. Make sure to keep them distracted from everything that's going on. And most importantly, make sure that they can only still be kids. Lord knows that we can't leave them feeling like they need to grow up fast, Kenny states, ruffling Izuku's hair. Okay, sir, Izuku said, before Kenny spoke again. How do you get your hair to be so soft, by the way, kid? Last time I checked, we don't have any kind of shampoo or conditioner that can do that. Kenny asked, genuinely confused, as Izuku lets out a cheeky smile. Trade secret, Izuku stutters out before walking away. That brat, Kenny said, chuckling. All right, we're moving on to the next chapter. While everyone was preparing themselves to get Larry his nitroglycerin tablets, Izuku was growing slightly fearful when the word had come up. He had a very bad experience with nitroglycerin in the past, and that was not something he needed to think about right now. But to hear that it could help the man with his heart issues, he stayed within the shop as he kept an eye on the outside. He was staying next to Doug, as the man kept watch on the walkers who stayed near the drugstore. As the two were keeping watch, Izuku noticed that Carly had walked into the back room with Lee, as she had a hard-to-read expression on her face. Shaking his head as to what was going on between the two, Izuku kept his hand on Clementine's radio for her as he kept an ear out for Glenn. He would like to He would stay like this for about an hour before he would hear some scratching from the radio itself before he answered it. He wasn't sure if Glenn needed some assistance at this moment, but he wanted to be sure that this was really him and not someone who killed him and is trying to find the rest of them. "Hey, little girl, are you there?" Glenn's voice came out. "Hey, is this Glenn?" Izuku asks, though stuttering. "Hey, kid, I'm not sure who you are, but can you get the radio to Clementine's dad? I need to get his assistance on something," Glenn states, as Izuku gives a gruff grunt. "Okay, are you stuck or something?" Izuku asks, as Glenn replies, "Yeah, I'm inside of a small freezer because while I was looking for some gas at the local inn, some geeks came up on me. I was forced to hide in order to stay out of their sight, but I was trying to help a girl who was stuck inside one of the rooms," Glenn explained, as Izuku rushed over to Lee. Entering through the doorway into the back room area, Izuku found Carly leaving the room as he delivered the radio to Lee. The man looked down at him as he bore a confused expression on his face before Izuku pointed to the radio itself as he answered. Pulling Clementine into the store with himself, Izuku made sure to keep her distracted for a while before Lee came back into the store. He was looking around before calling Carly over to himself before looking directly at him as he walked towards him as well, greatly confusing him. "Is there something you need?" Izuku asks, confused. "I want to know if you'd like to come with me," Lee asked, as Izuku looked away. I don't know. I wasn't much help against the walker earlier," he stuttered out, rubbing his left arm. "Don't worry, your assistance might prove useful on this mission. We're going to get Glenn back from the inn he's stuck at. Someone of your height might be useful for getting into small spaces," Lee said as Clementine pouted. "Why can't I go?" she asked. "Because there are too many walkers for you. With Izuku, I know that he's proficient in killing walkers. Sorry, Clementine. I will take you with me the next time I need to go somewhere, though," Lee said as Clementine nods. Am I going to have something to defend myself with?" Izuku stutters out, as Carly pulled out a knife. "I never leave an area without a knife of my own. You can use this. Just make sure to hit them in the head," as Izuku nods. After leaving the building and walking down the road as silently as possible, the small trio had left the drugstore in search of their ally. Reaching the inn in about 15 minutes, they found a large number of walkers patrolling the space as they growled to themselves quietly. Izuku took notice of a freezer nearby as he saw a walker stand up. Both Lee and Carly ducked with him beneath the wall. They heard it growl before it walked away from their location and towards a large RV in the middle of the parking lot. A bumping sound was heard from the freezer, causing Carly to point her gun at it. Izuku pulled her weapon down before they saw it was Glenn, who was coming out of his hiding spot with a smile, before taking notice of Izuku's presence. Stepping out of the freezer, he jumped over the wall and ducked beneath it as he whispered to Lee and Carly. "When I asked for help, I didn't think you'd bring a middle school student," he shouted. "I need to make sure he has the experience to fight walkers on his own. He's old enough to learn how to defend himself," Lee retorts. "He's right. He needs to know how to defend himself." Glenn nods. "I just wanted to know why the kid is here," he mutters. I was asked to assist," Izuku states as Glenn nods. "Okay, so I managed to collect the gas required to get everyone enough to come down here later. But I heard someone seemingly calling for help in that room up there," Glenn states, pointing at the barricaded doorway. "Oh no, I am not going to help someone else right now. We got the gas we need, so we can now go," Carly says as Glenn shakes his head. "Would you really let someone die to those things? We can't leave her all alone without knowing someone is out there to help," Glenn said as Carly shakes her own. "Damn right we can't. We shouldn't leave her behind," Lee mutters. "Lee, I think this might be getting us a little over our head," Izuku warns, through a stuttering tone. "Don't worry. If things go wrong, you can run back to the drugstore," Lee said, patting Izuku's head. "Fucking fine. Let's go save Glenn's damsel in distress," Carly growls out. After having their whisper argument, the group had moved over to a truck's window before using a random spark plug in order to break the window quietly. Once reaching inside, they pulled out a small ice pick, and Lee decided to add that to his repertoire of weapons. Moving from the truck over to a small vehicle that was being held up by a stopper, they killed the walker that was eating a dead body on the ground. Once he was done in, they reached inside and put the vehicle in neutral before pulling the stopper out of the way. The vehicle rolls down the parking lot before smashing right into a random walker and pinning it to the wall next to a fire axe. Lee and the others moved over to a small vehicle that had a walker standing around doing seemingly nothing. Killing it very quickly, they moved on to the RV before finding a walker behind it just looking at the vehicle distantly. Calling the walker over, Lee handed his weapon over to Izuku, as he allowed the boy to call this one since he killed the first two. As the walker got closer and closer to him, Izuku felt his adrenaline pumping through his veins as it rounded the corner growling loudly. Kicking its leg out from under it, Izuku watched as it fell onto its back before Izuku slammed the ice pick into its head. Pulling the weapon out of the walker's head, he looked at Lee, Carly, and Glenn as the trio smirked at him. Moving on to the walker stuck behind the vehicle, they managed to kill it, although at the loss of the ice pick, Izuku had stood onto the tire of the vehicle and stabbed the walker in the head, causing it to fall down and pushing the weapon further into its skull, the pointed end coming out the back end of its head. Lee and Glenn made a joke about the walker's body and the ice pick before they geeked out about a new weapon to use. All that was left was the two walkers banging on the door of the room where the woman could now be heard asking for the walkers to go away. Lee took charge on this one, as he rushed the two walkers and took them down without much fanfare, each with a single horizontal swing to the walker's head and neck, taking them down before moving on towards the door. Pulling out the wall, he moved up to the barricaded door and sliced through the wood easily. He knocked on the door, speaking to the woman in hopes that she'd open the door just so that they could get her to safety. "Hello? Are you okay in there?" Lee asks, knocking softly. "Just go away! Bitten, I already know what happens when you're bit!" the woman inside screams. "Well, she doesn't want to be saved, so let's go," Carly says as Izuku looks at her. "She could be in trouble, and fearful to ask for it," Izuku said, for once not stuttering. "Ma'am, if you don't open the door, we will need to break it down," Lee calls out with a warning. "Just go away! Leave me alone!" the woman screams. "I'm breaking the door down then," Lee calls out, kicking it. He was about to raise the axe to break it down when the woman could be heard from inside giving up. He lowered the weapon before they all heard the sounds of the door's locks becoming undone as she eventually walked out. Izuku, however, gained a very solemn expression on his face, as he noticed something that Glenn and Lee didn't before it was too late. There was blood coming from the woman's hip, and her skin was pale in color as she stared at the group. "I tried to warn you, but you wouldn't listen. I was already bitten," the woman says, pointing to her wound. "Maybe we could find a cure?" Izuku asks as the woman looked at him. "Kid, I've already seen what it does to people. I've seen I've seen it happen to my boyfriend," she replies. "You have a boyfriend?" Glenn asks dejectedly, but was pointedly ignored. "Glenn!" Carly growled and smacking him upside the head. "We could find a way to keep you alive," Lee states as the woman shakes her head. "I don't want to become one of them. They bite you and then you die and you come back and before you look for anything you can find," the woman said, insanity entering her irises. "Ma'am, we could still help you," Lee urged as the woman took notice of Carly's gun. "You have a gun?" she said as Carly became guarded. "Yeah? What about it?" she questioned cautiously. "Can I borrow it?" she asks. "What? No!" Carly states as the woman shrieked. "Please! I really don't want to become one of them. They're satanic," the woman pleads and mutters the last part. "Give her the gun," Lee states, his eyes covered in shadows. "What? I can't do that, Lee," Carly said as Lee glared at her. "Just do it," he growls. "Fine, but I'm not cleaning up the mess," Carly states, handing over the weapon. "Thank you for this. You are very kind. I can finally be with my boyfriend," she says as Lee speaks to her. Just make sure that it's quick, as the woman nods. Izuku walked down the stairs of the inn, meeting up with Carly and Glenn. The two were looking grim as they thought about the interaction between them and the woman who was bitten. Shaking their heads, they heard movement from the stairs as Lee returned with Carly's gun in hand. Shaking his head, the small group heard walkers incoming before rushing over to Glenn's vehicle and taking off back to the drugstore. Within minutes, they had returned back to the drugstore as they went back to their original jobs. As Lee continued with his plans of getting Larry his medicine. He leaves the building once again, but this time through the front door with Doug as they stand in the small area between the street and the store. Izuku keeps an eye out on the two from inside the building as he opens the door and stands out there with Doug. He finds another brick in case they need to get another distraction for Lee as they watch Lee break the window where Doug had turned the television from the store across the street on. Once the TVs are heard by the dead, they all walk over to it, becoming distracted by the sound, allowing Lee to walk over to a walker stuck under a telephone pole. For a while, Izuku watches as the man seemingly held a small conversation with the walker before raising the axe in the air. He let out small wails of sadness as he landed multiple blows to the walker, almost as though he knew the walker before this whole mess had happened, and they were human. Izuku keeps an eye on the walkers as they slowly heard him wailing out in sadness and turning around. Pulling out another item to use to distract the walkers, Izuku made sure to have Doug stay quiet before throwing the item across the street, hitting a car far away from Lee's position. The car alarm went off as the walkers came out from their distraction from Lee and moved towards the vehicle itself. Lee killed a couple walkers who got too close to him that didn't get distracted by the sound before arriving at the drugstore doors. The trio entered the building as they all let out breaths of fresh air before heading to the pharmacy. Lee called out to Lily as the woman had smiled at him as soon as he showed her the key to the pharmacy he'd gotten from the walker on the street. "Great, let's get in there and collect the pills," Lily states as she led Lee into the back room. Izuku watches from outside the pharmacy as the two opened the door and entered the room, only for an alarm to go off. As Lee cursed, Lily informed them to gather everything they could and search for the nitroglycerin tablets for her father. Outside the drugstore, a small distance away, a walker with a screwdriver in its left shoulder got up from the ground. It growled softly as it heard the alarm of the store going off in the distance. As it turned around a corner of a small alleyway it was laying down in, we see a very large horde of walkers banging at the metal fence and windows of the drugstore as the alarm got even louder. The growling of the walkers outside the building got worse as we see hundreds of walkers moving towards the building as the new walker was moving towards it as well. Inside the building, everyone was moving fast, as they tried to find anything to barricade the front entrance as much as possible to buy everyone time to escape. Kenny was running around giving orders as he told everyone what they were supposed to do until it was time to go. "Duck, come on, baby, time to go," Katja says, helping Duck around to leave. "I'm gonna get the truck pulled up round back," Kenny calls out, as Lily speaks up. "Do it fast! I've got to get my dad out of here," Lily said urgently. "I don't plan on dilly-dallying," Kenny retorts as Lily left. "Honey, take Duck into the office and barricade the living hell out of the door behind me. Glenn, when you hear me honking in the alley, start getting people out of here," Kenny states, as everyone nods. "You got it," Glenn said, as he moved into position. "Doug, Carly, and Lee, you guys make sure that our defenses stay up until then. And Lee, I better get that axe, in case I run into any of them on the way to my truck," Kenny ordered. "Here you go," Lee said, tossing the axe to him. "Izuku, you stay with Lee and make sure nothing gets past him. I'm depending on you to make sure nobody gets bit while we're leaving," Kenny states as Izuku nods. "Yes, sir," Izuku calls out, moving Clementine to the office. "Guys, that door's not locked anymore," Doug calls out, looking at the doorway after hearing a screeching sound. "Shit, you three get on it. I'll get back as fast as I can," Kenny called out as he walked away. "Stay away from the windows," Lee told Clementine and Izuku. The man rushed over to the door where Carly and Doug were barely holding back the horde who were bearing down on them with Glenn holding the door as well. But that was when Katja had called out for Glenn's assistance in the back. Glenn, we need your help! Please hurry! Lee arrives at the door and made an arm motion to allow Glenn to rush over to Katja in the office, who was holding back her own set of walkers from getting in. Lee pushed the door back closed as they felt and heard the walkers growling whilst pushing in the doors behind them. The force of each push causing the doors to open slightly before they were pushed back closed again. But this was when Doug decided to speak to everyone at the door as Izuku searched for something to hold back the door. Hey, Lee, if we don't make it out of this, you should know that I think you're a great guy, Doug said as Lee grunted out an answer. We will make it through this, Lee said as he struggled to hold the door shut. Doug, if we don't make it through this, you should know, Carly speaks before the door rudely interrupted her words. Pushing the doors back with all the strength he could muster, and with adrenaline coursing through his veins, Lee managed to hold it back. But that was when Doug began asking Carly questions about what she was going to talk about. I should know what? Doug asks with a confused expression on his face. Huh? Carly asks, looking at behind the two men. You said I should know, Doug said before the sounds of glass breaking behind him was heard. A walker calls out, knocking a small vending machine down as it broke through the glass. Shit! Carly calls out, leaving the two of them to hold the door as she shot at the walkers. On it, she said, pulling out her gun. Are you sure? Lee asks, as Carly let out a small eeping sound. Oh, shit! Bang, bang. What? Oh, shit. Okay, then. Lee mutters before finding Izuku. Izuku, can you look for something to stick between the handles? Something really strong. Yeah, I think I remember seeing something in the office, Izuku calls out and rushing away. The walkers managed to push the front door out of the way a bit, causing Lee to push it back down with Doug on his left. They continued this game of keep and take until glass was heard breaking from Lee's right, as Doug left him in order to take care of that issue. Izuku, did you find anything? Lee calls out. I'm sure it was in here somewhere. Oh, there it is! Izuku's voice was heard. That window is screwed! Doug calls out as Lee allowed him to move away. Go! He called out before the door was pushed open wider by the walkers. Struggling even more now, as he was the only one holding the doors shut, with some great effort, Lee manages to get the door closed when Izuku arrived. He held the cane to Lee's father that he'd told Clementine about. And Lee in that moment couldn't help but see the irony in what Izuku had found. Pushing the cane through the door's handles and moving away, the two watched as the doors were pushed on as the cane held its ground. Nodding at their display of ingeniousness, they heard screams from their left and right and were brought to a stop as their eyes were brought to a stop as everything around them, including time, slowed down to a crawl. On one end of the shop, a walker had Carly's ankle with one hand as she struggled to reach out for her purse, which held more magazines for her gun. Another walker incoming. But on the other side of the store where Lee saw the window breaking was Doug as he was barely holding himself inside the store. Multiple hands of walkers had pulled through and grabbed onto him as he barely kept himself from being pulled into the streets. Their hearts beat in slow motion as Lee watched Izuku rush over to Carly, allowing him to head after Doug. As Izuku grabbed a mag from Carly's purse and tossed it at her, she caught it, reloaded her magazine, and then shot the two walkers. With Lee, he had managed to pull Doug away from the walkers, and the four of them rushed over to the office as Kenny had arrived. Let's go! He calls out. As everyone ran through the doorway, all that was left was Clementine, Lee, and Izuku as they rushed to the door. A walker appeared out of nowhere as they grabbed Clementine's ankle, causing the girl to fall to the ground. Running as fast as he could, Izuku rushed over and kicked the walker's head as hard as he could before stabbing it in the head with the knife he'd gotten from Carly. Once the walker was dead, the trio ran towards the doorway as Izuku saw Larry walking back into it with a furious expression on his face. Just as Lee was about to enter the office, he saw Larry standing there holding the door open and knew he was going to try something. You're not coming with us, you son of a bitch! Larry growled before punching the man. Lee! Izuku screams, gaining Kenny's attention. Larry walked out the doorway and towards the vehicles as Izuku ran towards Lee. Helping the man up, they both stumbled out of the drugstore as Izuku closed the doors behind them both. Kenny assisted Izuku in getting Lee into the back of his truck before saying one last thing to the two of them. I'm not letting somebody else get eaten today, especially a good friend, Kenny states before pushing the Lee into the back of his truck with Izuku jumping into the back seat as Clementine hugged Lee. It was an hour later after the drugstore was invaded by the walkers. Everyone was clearing out the inn from the walkers who were laying about, as well as the new ones that they'd all killed. Moving the garbage bins over to the entrances at the motor inn, they had the slopes of the bins pointed inwards so that it'd be easy to get in and out of the place. Lee walked around the place, talking to people as Izuku sat next to Clementine, and Duck, as the boy was telling Clem about a comic he'd read one time. Izuku was smiling as he patted the boy's shoulder, allowing Lee to speak to the two of them without the boy interrupting. Izuku did notice that while Lee was walking over to the two of them, that Larry was openly glaring at the man with seemingly hatred in his eyes. Shaking his head at the elderly man's antics, Izuku focused his attention at the man who was protecting Clementine and him somewhat. Hey, Duck, you want to cool it for a minute? Lee questions as Duck apologized. Okay, sorry, he said reasonably. I'm sorry there's not a lot of kids here, Lee said as Izuku shakes his own. No, it's not that. I got grabbed again, Clementine said, a little sad. I was there, though, Lee said, trying to console her. I fell, and my walkie-talkie broke. Glenn had the other one, Clementine states as Izuku feels very bad. Oh, I'm sorry, Lee apologized. Thanks. I know I need to be tough. I'm just sad, Clementine said, looking down before continuing. I know it doesn't make any sense, but it's how I used to talk to my mom and dad, and now they're gone. It's gone, Clementine said, tears falling from her eyes. Maybe we can find you another one, Lee asked, trying to lift her spirits. I'll just keep this one, I guess, settling on the one with the more sentimental value. Don't worry, Clementine. I'm sure that we can fix it, Izuku said, hoping to get Clementine to smile, which in fact did. Albeit sadly. Lee, come over here for a second, Larry's voice called out. Let me go deal with this, Lee said as Izuku followed after him. As Clementine nodded at the two of them, Duck came back and started talking about his comic books again. Izuku chuckled a little bit when hearing the boy rattle on about his little comics. It reminded Izuku about the life he used to live back in his world. The world that was filled with superpowers. Not only that, but how he had his last conversation with All Might in his world. Shaking his head as a stray tear fell from his eye, he focused his thoughts on what Larry was going to tell Lee. His opinion of Larry had definitely changed ever since he tried to get Lee killed back at the drugstore, so his emotions were locked tight when he stepped next to Lee. What do you want? Lee questions, a glare on his face, pointed at directly Larry. You, like my daughter? He questioned, as Izuku looked downright confused. Her dad tried to kill me, so, Lee said, looking back at the man. Well, he did that because he knows that Lee Everett is a convicted murderer. And so will everyone else if you go near her. You hear me? Larry said, threatening, the threat in his tone. I know who you are, and I don't give a shit about what happens to you, Larry states, poking Lee in the chest before continuing. But if anything happens to my daughter or that little girl you've got with you, you watch your ass, Larry said as Izuku speaks up. Well, then it'd be better that we tell everyone that you tried to kill him back at the drugstore then, Izuku said, causing Larry to glare down at him. What are you going to do? Nobody's going to believe you, Larry said as Izuku speaks up again. I may not be someone who is really well known within this group, but at least Lee managed to save your people. Not only that, but when we were in the drugstore, we prevented Carly and Doug from being killed. Where in the hell were you? Izuku questioned, glaring back at the man. You think you can talk back to me, little brat? Larry growled. Careful, Larry. Make sure that you keep your activity low. Don't want you to have another heart attack, don't we? Izuku threats before walking away with Lee. As Izuku left Lee alone, Lily called Lee over to herself as the two walked out to the street. Izuku kept a very close eye on him and Lily as he watched Larry glare over at the colored man with a deep-seated hatred in his eyes. As the two talked, Kenny walked over to them before speaking to them as well. And from what it seemed like, Lily made an optimistic statement. Before all the lights in the area began to turn off down the road. It continued further until it reached the motor inn as the sign had suddenly turned off, taking away all signs of light in and from around the building. Izuku suddenly became very wary as soon as the lights turned off, because walkers could now sneak up on them without the light on. Because of this, everyone immediately set up the base and turned in for the night in one of the inn's rooms. Izuku had a room of his own because he didn't wish to be in the same room as anyone else. And he really wanted to have some time to think to himself.
Next time, on The Walking Dead. I thought we'd be fine if we survived the walkers. Never expected that they'd starve us out.
Lee's voice was heard on the background of the parking lot of the motor inn. I want you to have this, okay? In case you or Clementine starts feeling weak, Carly spoke, handing Lee some food. I know that I'm not the person for this kind of job, but you could at least trust me enough to actually tell you when trouble happens, Izuku's voice angrily calls out.
Tough shit,
Larry's voice retorts towards Izuku. The two were glaring at one another in the middle of the motor inn as they looked into one another's eyes. Larry folding his arms over his hips, glaring down at Izuku, who had done the same, only looking up.
You don't owe me anything, Carly,
Lee said, refusing the food.
How you doing, Clementine?
Lee asks Clementine as they stood at the edge of the parking lot looking into the forest. I'm really hungry, Lee, Clem states, holding her stomach with a pained expression.
We gotta get food soon, Lee,
Kenny said as two men appeared from the forest.
Howdy, I'm Andrew St. John. We're from the St. John's Dairy,
a new voice called out, introducing himself as Andrew.
It's beautiful,
Lee said, looking over the farmland of the St. John's. I never did thank you for saving Duck from the walkers back at the Herschel's farm, Concha said as Lee nods.
Something's coming, Lee. There's gonna be a war, Kenny said as Lee retorts. The walkers don't worry me as much as the bandits,
Lee said as we now see him coming up to it from a tractor.
You fucked us! Now we're gonna take what we want,
bandits called out, shooting arrows.
Bang! Bang!
There's too many of them, a new voice calls out. We're treated to a scene where the new guy is wearing a large t-shirt over his torso with the front open to show a smaller one underneath. The sleeves are pulled up to the wrists as the man is shot in the back right shoulder with an arrow as he lets out a grunt of pain.
You've never liked my dad,
He screams at Lee as Larry was seen glaring at the two from one side of the motor inn.
Even back at the drugstore when everyone thought Kenny's kid was bit, you went out of your way to side against him,
Lily angrily told Lee in an enclosed space. This isn't happening, a new young boy said, holding a rifle. A walker gets shot in the face as everything fades to black, and a new voice is heard once again.
No more! Please! No more! Please! Lee, please!
The voice said as we now see Lee holding the fire axe in the air and slam it downward towards her leg. The voice called out, revealing the name for the next episode. The name for the next episode. The Walking Dead, Episode 2, Starved for Help. Alright, that's the end of this video. I hope you all give a like, subscribe, and I'll see you all on the next video. Ciao!